Hello everyone, welcome back to the Cine Bijou podcast. As you can see, the lights are dimming, the curtain is pulled back, and we're thrilled to pick up season 2 where we left off. From here on out, we'll be seeing you at least once a month with fresh episodes exploring the world of independent film. To keep up to date with latest episodes, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you love what we're doing, the best way to help us grow is to subscribe, like, and share the show with your fellow cinephiles. We also want to hear from you, so please leave a comment on our latest episode and join the conversation. Finally, if you'd like to help keep the projector running, consider supporting us over on Patreon for exclusive rewards. Now, let's get into this month's feature.
Hi guys, I'm Jim Cameron, and this is Aliens Expanded.
So, just on your reflections then, when was the first time you saw Aliens, and in what capacity? Was that as a movie fan or as a journalist? What were your thoughts?
I don't go back quite that far as a journalist. I was 16.
Same here.
And I've told the story a bit, but I'll tell the story again. Is that I didn't get to see Alien because I was too young, but I'd caught it on VHS along with The Thing, and became rather obsessed. So Aliens, the news that Aliens was coming along was a huge deal. And it must have been, I mean, obviously, it's a long time ago, but there was no internet. So my knowledge of that a sequel was coming had to be through trailers. It just simply had to be through going to see other films and seeing the trailer and going, oh my God, there's going to be a sequel at last. Because it'd been 7 years. What happened between, and it was an era when, yes, you set aside the kind of Star Trek and Star Wars. Sequels weren't really a big thing. They did happen, but it wasn't like how Hollywood became, where sequels were basically how the kind of whole industry functioned. So there wasn't really a huge expectation that there would be a sequel. So the idea that it was coming, and it was a great surprise and a delight. And I became a bit obsessed with having to see it as soon as humanly possible. Even at the age of 16, I was still quite sort of geeky and into kind of these things. Well, I still am today. And I ended up going to see it with my dad. And we went to the Odeon, Fulham Palace Road. And the time of day is a bit vague to me now. I seem to remember it being the afternoon, but it was a very full cinema. So I'm not quite sure how that works. It may have been an evening. And of course it was so incredible, and it lived up to everything I could have wanted from it. Yet it gave me something quite different, which I've come to understand is the Cameron style and the Cameron energy, which is different from Ridley Scott's. But my most distinct memory of that first time was at the point where Burke shuts the door on Ripley and Newt. Some rows behind me got a little bit carried away, and I don't know when they stood up. In my kind of mythological memory, they've stood up, but maybe they didn't. And they just shouted, "You bastard!" at the top of their voice at the screen. And there's this kind of ripple of laughter amongst the kind of the audience. What kind of amazed me, it really was that I thought someone is so involved and so embraced or so sort of taken over by this film that they've lost their kind of sense of where they are and what should or shouldn't be done in a cinema. And it was great. And, it took like half a second for all of us to be back in the film again. It wasn't like we were kind of like taken out of it. And I thought that was such in hindsight, that's such a telling kind of compliment to the grip that film has on people. I remember in the documentary, Gail Ann Hurd was telling a story about, on the opening night, her and Cameron went round the cinemas, and they saw a similar thing with a girlfriend ripping off the arm of her cinema seat and just hitting her boyfriend with it. And maybe, I don't watch enough films these days, but I don't know if films can do that anymore. I don't know. I've changed and I'm older and I don't quite get sucked in like I did. And being a journalist and documentary maker, maybe you become a different person. But the only two films where I've ever seen that were Aliens and Silence of the Lambs, where the woman next to me in during Silence of the Lambs with the bit where Lecter escapes, the whole lift going up and down, incredible sequence with the kind of the lift marker going up and down. And the first time you really don't know what the hell's going on. And this woman beside me just lost control. She was just going fuck, 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 fuck at the top of her voice, and I just thought, my God, this is how powerful film can be. And I kind of like, I often wonder, and I've been sort of researching a different project, a sort of book project, and wondering about the initial chest burster in Alien and think, what must that have been like, 1979, to go into a cinema, to have no idea, because there was no internet, there was no way of knowing. Maybe word of mouth after a few weeks might have told people, but on that initial week, you would have gone in without any defenses and you would have seen the chest burster, and I must have just like destroyed you. How you even recovered from that point onwards, which was kind of the point I think Ridley Scott wanted to do. But my overall point was that Aliens had an incredibly powerful experience on me, and it kind of reinforced what I already knew about Alien, and that in ways I couldn't quite and still can't quite quantify. They were very important films to me, and they had stayed with me, and I've spent kind of the rest of my life sort of trying to figure that out, and what is it about these films. And really it's the first two above all that just hit me, and that 1-2 sense of knowing Alien and then seeing Aliens, and and what Cameron did with the concept, just was an absolute confirmation of something for me. It was just like, yes, it's the character of Ripley, it's this world, it's this creature, it's this kind of mix of ways, sci-fi and a kind of realism. It's not sci-fi like Star Wars, which I did love. It was a sci-fi that said this world is gritty and real and awful and terrifying, and that was very new to me. And as I say, I've never quite shaken it off.
No, I get what you mean. And I was reflecting just then on what you said
Yeah,
about sequels in the 80s. We're comparable age. So,
yeah,
like you, I was 15 going on 16 when I saw Aliens. I know it was an 18 certificate at the time, but I snuck in with some friends who looked just the right age, and they,
yeah,
kind of distracted the box, the ticket office. And my recollection of sequels was that, yeah, there were, aside from Star Wars, sequels, and of course Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan,
yeah,
sequels were really often seen as not quite up to par of the first film. The first film was always the, the trendsetter, the
yeah,
milestone which you could never reach, and they seem to do better in the home video market. But Aliens was the one that I I think when I read it in Film Review magazine, I don't know if you remember Film Review
I do remember it.
before,
Yes.
yeah, my go-to Bible before Empire came along. Though I remember reading about it and thinking, oh God, a sequel. It's going to be, it's not going to be
Yeah,
as
yeah.
good. How are you going to capture all that? So I think the biggest shock was, my God, this is possibly the best sequel I've ever seen. As a teenager and possibly later on as a journalist, as an adult, would you say that in terms of
Yeah,
sequels, it is one of the best made?
it's an interesting argument, isn't it? And this argument has come up a lot that, as you say, sequels were always an idea of diminishing returns and not better. And I refuse to engage with the argument of is Aliens or Alien a better film, because it really just doesn't matter to me. But I like your idea about, is Aliens a perfect sequel? And I think it certainly is. In the bare bones idea of what a sequel is, it's the same but different. And that impossible task of taking the original idea and moving it on, but not losing what people like about the first one. Cameron is an artist at that concept. You look at Terminator 2 and its relationship with Terminator. He does extraordinary things with the idea of sequel. And one of the great delights in making Aliens Expanded was I spent a lot of time comparing Alien and Aliens in kind of structural terms, not in qualitative terms. And I realized in a way I hadn't before that Cameron follows Alien really closely. yet you don't notice. He almost hits beat by beat. He reflects the scenes in Alien are brought into Aliens, really brilliantly, kind of reflecting the original film, but with this kind of amped up, increased sense of, more aliens, more humans, more energy, an action movie, perhaps over what the original was a kind of sci-fi horror movie. That certainly to me marks one of the greatest sequels. I'm not very good at top tens and bests of all time because I'm rather greedy. I want it all. I don't want to kind of have to choose one over another. The Godfather Part Two is often held up, but you could argue it's rather like Empire Strikes Back. It's the same story carrying on. But you can argue that about Aliens in a sense because it's Ripley's story, and while it is a kind of unit in itself, the first four films are Ripley's saga, and she is the constant, and obviously she does carry on. So, in some senses, the original Alien franchise is a saga, like Star Wars and like The Godfather and things like that. Another one you can bring up is Mad Max 2, which is, leaps and bounds better than Mad Max. It really is kind of a defining film in that franchise and carries on the character's saga. It centers on Max and it moves it along. So certainly I think Aliens is a perfect sequel. As I say, I don't engage with the idea of whether it's better or worse or, with Alien because it doesn't matter to me. They are part of the same thing and they share a relationship and more power to them for that. But I certainly think Cameron invented the Alien franchise. Ridley Scott didn't invent it. He made a one-off and a masterpiece. But what Cameron did was he invented the Alien franchise. He created a way to carry on and to play with the life cycle, to play with the nature of the creature, bring the Queen in, play with the character of Ripley and expand that, and play with the concept of that world, where humanity is in, I suppose it's now, 150 years into our future or something like that, and what space travel might be like. And that lovely sense of reflecting the past. So that, Aliens is a Vietnam film. It's got something of history in it. And I think Ridley Scott's had that as well. They're kind of futuristic films that are built from the past. That's another thing that always intrigues me about them. So all those things sort of added together, yes, I agree. It is one of the greatest sequels of all time, arguably the best. But it's a fun argument to keep having, not having to solve.
I think it is hard actually to compare Aliens to Alien because different filmmakers, different approaches, although, as you've pointed out, James Cameron has followed on from
Yeah.
Ridley Scott so perfectly and seamlessly that it is a continuing story. But I suppose their influences are different as well. Alien was mostly made possible because of Star Wars. When Star Wars was a big hit in the 70s, everybody wanted to do space adventures, and Alien came along to say, well, we want to do that, but maybe something different. I'd like that you mentioned the Vietnam influence of
Yeah.
Aliens, and that's touched on quite extensively in Aliens Expanded, because I remember when I was watching the film in the cinema, then later on home video, I debated with some of my film fan friends, is this a
Yeah.
sci-fi movie? Is this a horror movie? And we even debated because not long after that, you had Platoon, Full Metal Jacket,
Yeah.
Hamburger
Yeah.
Hill all come out. Is this a Vietnam film? Is this a war movie?
Well,
We
it's
asked ourselves, is it
yeah.
a war movie? Because I'd been exposed to Apocalypse
Yeah.
Now as a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah.
Friends of mine said, "Oh, you got to watch this; it's really good." Came away absolutely horrified. I was a young teenager at the time, but
It's quite
blown away
rough,
by
quite
it.
strong. Yeah.
And I thought,
Yeah.
I see some similarities here. So, I mean, is it a genre crossing film, Alien?
Absolutely. And it's a genre crossing franchise. You got to remember that the Alien, while yes, it was commissioned by 20th Century Fox, who had made Star Wars and certainly had Star Wars in mind. And Ridley himself was very influenced by seeing, certainly stylistically, Star Wars, how the world was built, the idea of a dirty future. lived in future. I think he very much was influenced by Star Wars in that respect. But he also was enormously influenced by Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Jaws and The Exorcist, and that idea of what the 70s were doing with genre. 70s filmmakers, obviously very famous story, made these kind of radical new Hollywood films that broke all the rules, that were morally ambiguous and engaged with America and a cynical world and all those kind of things. Well-told story. But if you look particularly at what the genre was doing during the 70s, it wasn't being rejected, it was just being made realistic. It was being given. So you had a horror movie in The Exorcist that brought all that kind of religious angst and the idea of death, the Satan and possession, and it turned it into something very sharply real in front of our eyes. Spielberg then did that with Jaws. The one thing about Jaws that makes it last is not that it's blockbustery, it's that it's really realistic, it's that authentic. You watch it and think, this is the real sea, these are real people, that's a real shark. Well, it doesn't look very real, obviously, when it comes out, but beyond that, you feel it. And I think Ridley carries that on with Alien. I think his binding element is it's not absurd. It cannot be absurd. You can't laugh at it unless you're laughing in hysteria. You have to believe. It's not he didn't want it to be like Star Wars, a leap of the imagination where you're taken somewhere else. Really wanted you sort of almost to stay where you are and say, right, I'm going to put you in a realistic world. And I think Cameron then picks up that. And within that, is this idea of touchstones that we relate to. So yes, of course, it's far-flung. It's a planetoid, some light years, from Earth. There is interplanetary travel. There is all sorts of things. There are kind of pulse rifles. There is a future tech. But the resonance, I think, that comes with it is Vietnam. Look at the way he dressed the Marines. Cameron was drawing upon Dispatches, Michael Hare's book. He'd been reading all that. It's in the doc. All the stuff he'd kind of been researching. He'd been writing Rambo, 2 at the time as well. So that was all part of his kind of makeup. He knew Apocalypse Now, as you mentioned, very, very well, and was drawing upon that. And I love that idea of colliding relatable things with science fiction and horror, because somehow that makes the science fiction and horror more powerful. If the Thing is obviously a thing that's been on my mind for recently. And one of the joys of The Thing is the creature is so far-fetched, yet the world around the creature is so gritty and so real, and the characters are so sort of honest that the comparison becomes very stark and powerful. And I think that's true of Aliens, is that we think of them as contemporary, those Marines. Whether that's conscious or not, they feel contemporary. They feel like guys we know. And that just makes you empathetic towards them. It makes you believe in the world. It just brings it to life, and I think that's quite extraordinary in genre terms, to be able to sort of keep that and to do it. And I don't know, sort of post Aliens, has it sort of dwindled a little bit, that sort of idea of, contemporary science fiction and horror, as we've sort of, I suppose it has sort of carried on in some way, certainly in horror, but in science fiction sort of gone off and become very sort of far-fetched and excitable. Whereas, there was something about the Alien franchise, and Blade Runner and to some extent bits of Star Wars that were very relatable.
Yes, I totally agree. I think something I've noticed as well is that um, it was so groundbreaking. I remember even at this time thinking it was so groundbreaking. Yes, I did see Alien when they showed it late night on ITV.
Yeah.
I sort of snuck out of bed and put the telly on while my parents were asleep to watch Alien, because I'd seen the TV spots. I thought, I knew about this film. I saw the book in the library. I've got to see this film, and promptly went to bed completely scared out of my mind, but thought this is excellent. And the thing that stood out for me was that the hero of the story was not only the cat Jonesy, but of course Ripley. It was a woman who took charge, who saved the day, and now in Aliens you have uh, I think it was described in Aliens Expanded as a broken person, if you know, or a damaged
Yeah,
person,
that comes
but
from Sigourney herself. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, she
coming
was.
back to
Yeah,
once again, and there's that correlation, isn't there, with Rambo First Blood Part Two,
yeah,
where this time they're going to get it right.
yeah.
So
Oh, you
another
can
observation,
see. I mean, he
yeah,
was writing them all at the same time, and he was
mm,
preparing Terminator. It's an incredible period in Cameron's life where
yeah,
he had sort of separate desks and separate
mm,
music and all sorts of things to keep him able to do it. But yeah, certainly you can see them bleeding into one another. You can see the
yes,
Vietnamness go one way and something of the kind of the heroics going the other way.
yeah,
And yes, Sigourney is, it's a redemptive story.
hmm,
It's a going back story.
yeah, and it's redemptive. And again, you've got what's really stood out for me is it's the woman who saves the day. It's the woman who's making the decisions, taking charge, and leading the battle, and being the hero of the
But the,
story.
the the power of that, and it's there in Alien as well, is that yeah, the fact that Ripley is a woman is everything and it means nothing at the same time.
Hmm.
Because it's not the fact that she's a woman, it's the fact she is who she is. And her natural leadership qualities come out of her as an individual. And the joy of casting her as a woman is that you're saying, because Hollywood had said, well, that can't ever happen. That's there's nothing to happen. And Cameron and Scott didn't even think about it. They don't even make a point of her being a woman. They just go, this character is going to save the day because she has the skill set to do it. And let's just get on with it. And Sigourney loves that idea that, what she loves the fact it's understated, that she just gets it done, is the way
Yeah.
Sigourney puts it.
Hmm.
I don't think in terms of a feminist. She's just
Yeah.
someone who gets it done, and maybe that's true of women. Maybe they're
Yeah.
better at getting things done than men. And I
Hmm.
think that is a commentary, certainly in the first two, well, and the third film. It's that you watch the men lose control
Yes.
and not have an answer, and the natural mother, the woman who has to survive to look after the girl, she
Hmm.
has the skills to do it,
Yeah.
to look at it in that way. And
Hmm.
it's a very sort of powerful way of yeah, a feminist subtext, but making it part of the fabric of the story.
Yeah. I think the reason that stood out for me, and I absolutely loved it, because I grew up on Hong Kong action movies where
Yeah.
women were often the heroes as much as the men. But the reason it stood out for me is because I'd also watched a lot of James Bond
Yes.
when back in the day when you had a resourceful woman as the sidekick, if you like, or as the partner.
Yeah.
Uh, the one comment that, say, Roger Moore would certainly made in Moonraker was when he introduced to Holly Goodhead was, "Oh, a woman,"
I
and
know.
I used to think, what's that got to do with it? So to actually see that played out and not questioned, or if
Yeah.
gender is not
The
really
film
a
does not,
question.
neither film stops to make a point about it.
No,
It does, the only I think that you could probably say is that I think Ridley understood there would have been an expectation for the men to save the day, and he was
yes,
playing with that, and he
hmm,
liked the idea that it undercut expectations. But nothing in either script says, "Oh, it's a
hmm,
woman." It just says Ripley just does it because she has
yeah,
natural ability to do it,
hmm,
and that may come, and partly that comes from being a woman, but it's getting things done, as Sigourney would say.
yeah, absolutely. So so as you said, Cameron created the franchise. I don't know if that was his intention, but he certainly opened the door and an appetite for more aliens related, what we now call content, because the games
Yeah.
followed the comics. But the next film didn't really come till 92 with Alien 3. And then it's been kind of a controversial road
Yeah,
to
it's been
follow
it's,
since then,
it's
hasn't
been
it?
a complex road, hasn't it, ever since? Yeah, it's a really funny franchise if you look at it as a whole, because it's so difficult. It finds it really hard to sort of reinvent itself each time. It took
Mhm.
7 years to get to Aliens, and Aliens was a struggle. On set, although it's a great outcome, and it's probably the one that was most assured in the sense of Cameron knew what story he wanted to tell, and he told it. It was just getting that story told that was a kind of struggle. But then you come to Alien 3, and an Alien itself had been a real battle to get
Mhm.
made and done as Scott wanted it to be done. So you come to Alien 3, and the whole, if you read about the legacy of the pre-production and the kind of development of that, so, which would seem a natural film to make after the success of Aliens, you thought,
Mm.
well, come on, this is. But I think there was something about how brilliant the first two films are and how inventive and how they kind of launched to extraordinary careers, to the great careers in modern Hollywood, that there was a burden that Alien sequels had to carry that was different from other franchises, that
Yeah.
you couldn't just turn up again and replay the same moves. You had to do something serious and brilliant and clever, and you had to bring forth a director who was going to match Cameron and Ridley Scott. And in a sense, Alien 3 did do that. David Fincher is almost the equivalent of those two guys.
Hmm.
Yet the film is something of a muddle. It had gone through so many iterations and so many. It's another thing I've written about. And what you can't accuse Alien 3 of is a lack of thought. It's overthink that kind of
Hmm.
holds it back. It's got too many ideas. It's been through too many iterations, had too many too much endeavor to try and outdo the past. And it's just a bit of a kind of Frankenstein's monster. I have a lot of
Hmm.
time for it as a kind of visual world and a kind of miserablest kind of sort of horror movie. It's not a great alien movie because the creature is a little bit not very successfully portrayed, I don't think, in Alien 3. But a lot of the
Hmm.
rest of it is good. And then it just, each time, Alien Resurrection, which again, interesting elements, but a slight tonal problem perhaps, and a bit of a
Hmm.
mess at the end. And then Ridley is given rein to pursue his ideas about what came before, for good and bad. And it all gets a bit knotty, shall we say. I mean,
Yes.
I interviewed Noah Hawley for Empire, and he talked about Alien Earth. And again, we can argue back and forth on Alien Earth. But he was saying one of the things he liked about the world of Alien was that it doesn't have a really developed mythology. You know, Marvel or Star Wars, they have this really complex kind of history in which these films are embedded. Whereas Alien, the less you know, the better. The more mystery, the better. And I think the problem may be with the prequels, Prometheus and Covenant, is that it started to answer questions we hadn't asked. And you always, I have a slight problem with prequels anyway, because you're always writing into a corner. And I just kind of felt that the mystery of the space jockey and the derelict was so extraordinary, had held such a spell on me
Hmm.
that I never needed to know the answer because it would always shatter whatever was in my brain. And that was what was extraordinary. And I get the hint that it might be a bomb, this creature, and it might be a military thing, and it might be made, and why were there so many eggs and all that. But I didn't need an answer. I didn't need to that. And Ridley did, and Ridley wanted to
Hmm.
go back and figure that out. And I think part of the problem might be that you kind of didn't have it all figured out. It was too kind of like we're working this out as we go along, and a bit of this, a bit of that, and it's great a filmmaker as he is as visual as those two films are.
Hmm.
They didn't have that kind of elegance of Alien and Aliens, where the story was so organic that I always say great stories are feeling inevitable when
Hmm.
you kind of think about them afterwards. What
Yeah.
happens felt inevitable. Nothing else could have happened, but what happens in those films. While you're watching them, you don't know that, but there's a kind of gravity that
Hmm.
moves them along
Yeah.
that's so powerful it's inevitable.
Absolutely.
As you write it, you must go, this is what has to happen next. He
Yes.
has to fight the Queen. It's inevitable, and it's brilliant.
Hmm.
Whereas with the kind of films like Alien 3 and Prometheus, it doesn't feel inevitable. It feels a bit like, well, did that need to happen? All these kind of questions come into your mind that the film shouldn't really be asking. And I mean, I struggle. I know there are fans of those films, but I do tend to think of the Alien franchise as those four films, and it has these kind of offshoots and kind of other projects, and it's a funny beast if you look at it as a whole. It's Alien versus Predator, and whatever happened with those, and We now got Alien Romulus and Alien Earth, so it keeps iterating, but it doesn't seem to be necessarily progressing. Whereas, those first two films just have this kind of extraordinary sense of being
Yes.
that's never been rediscovered. As hard as people try, they've never found it, and maybe they never will. I don't know. I live in hope, like all of us, but
We'll wait and see.
yeah,
So we've got, let's see, 4 Alien movies, two
yeah,
Alien versus Predator movies, that's 7. Then you've got Prometheus, Covenant, Romulus, that's 10, I want to
yeah.
say.
And then Alien
Yeah,
Earth
and then
TV.
Alien Earth. And not to mention all the games and comics. So
Oh, yeah.
nearly 30 years later, along comes yourself, teaming up with Creative VC to write and direct, which I believe is your first of
My
the
first
Creative
documentary, yeah.
documentary, Aliens Expanded.
Talk to me, Hudson! Multiple signals!
Without a doubt, Aliens is the best movie that I've ever been in.
We all knew that we had something.
If you're gonna only be in one movie, this was the movie to be in.
I don't think we had seen that in film before.
It was so real.
It's brilliant.
It's so fresh, so exciting, so adrenal.
Let's pack 'em in! Get in there!
I want this thing to go smooth and by the numbers.
Paxton turned to me and he was like, "Oh, dude, this is gonna be so awesome."
This wasn't just a hit movie, it was something that would really endure.
A phenomenal piece of filmmaking.
I'd been on a lot of sets, but this one was the next level.
In my mind, it was experimental cinema. Everybody thought I was nuts.
Is he going to be casual? Is he going to be a monster?
He was under pressure. If you're screwing around, he's gonna tell you.
A little bit of abuse doesn't hurt.
And it all just went dark.
6.
Remember, short, controlled bursts.
Just shock and awe.
We were all cheering for Sigourney.
She goes 100% feral.
But she's got the gun and the flamethrower.
He's alive. There's still time.
It definitely is movie history.
It was a great time in my life.
Get away from her, you bitch!
I was born to make that movie.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Now, in terms of your approach for the documentary, with so much already out there, whether it's on IMDb, although that's not always reliable, but certainly all the books written, everything in terms of what's been featured in film magazines, authoritative journals, and so forth. When you decided to do Aliens Expanded, was there a concern that there was nothing new to tell in terms of the story of Aliens?
Oh, yes. I mean, the biggest concern, the biggest kind of albatross on your shoulders, and through the whole journey of it, from start to finish, was the thought that everyone knows this already. You're preaching to the converted, you're telling people stuff they already know. And you have this a bit when you write books and, certainly when you're very popular subjects. And you have to kind of make a bit of peace with it. Of course, you endeavor to find fresh takes and fresh stories and, find new angles on, the tried and tested world of these films. And, the internet is so extraordinary in terms of how it now looks upon its favored children like Aliens and Alien, these fantastic kind of minds and sites and podcasters who just have the time and space to, really. Aliens Expanded is 4 hours 17, I think it is, in terms of before you get to the credits. But there's people like Alien Theory, Derek Defoe's site, which he must have, it's weeks worth of material he must have established, going over the minutiae of the whole franchise. So you were up against this kind of hive mind of alien kind of analysis. And the way I made my peace with that was, I said that the question I was asking wasn't necessarily what's new to say about aliens. It was a simpler question than that. It was, why do we love aliens? Yeah. And the answer contained multitudes. But everything that I did had to be fueled by that one question. Why do we love it? And if the piece in the documentary isn't ultimately answering or trying to answer that question, then it wasn't worth doing or worth asking. So, so you tell the making of story and familiar stories such as the Tea Lady and, and Gale Anne Hurd's kind of battle with the hierarchy and casting, getting Sigourney Weaver back. But you sort of spin it through this prism of why do we love the film so much? So why was it vitally important to have Sigourney Weaver back? From Cameron's point of view, from the storytelling point of view, when you could have moved on and told a different story. You could have had a different lead character. So that becomes your way of looking at aliens that you hope speaks to the viewer. Because I knew that everyone who was invested and wanted to watch Aliens Expanded loves it. I had complete faith in that idea that, I wasn't winning people over to the cause of aliens. They were absolutely on board in terms of their love of the film. What I wanted to do was reflect that back to the viewer, that like yourself, a huge fan of it, that it spoke to you about your life and it spoke to you about your passions and who you are, because these are things you think about and you adore, and and you would know some of these stories, but it would be told to you in such an affectionate, passionate way that it felt more vibrant and alive to you, that you would go, yeah, I know the story of pulse rifles, and I know the story of the kind of the hive ambush and all those sequences, but the way we discuss it, you just enjoy going back there. And I always think about it like, you go down the pub with your film fan friends and you happily have the same conversations about films you love. You happily do it. And you probably had them 30 times, remember that bit, remember that bit.
Yeah.
But it gives you pleasure to do it. And maybe each time you spin it a little bit in a different way and you come at it. And that to me was what I was doing with Aliens Expanded. I was just having that conversation, and all these different things were being noodled over and thought about. And I got to bring Sigourney Weaver and Gale Anne Hurd and James Cameron into that conversation, which was magnificent. And but it wasn't a making of, and it wasn't the untold story. It wasn't, that way of going about documentaries. It's, I said this a lot, it's all I've made is a love story, and between fans and the film.
It is definitely a love letter to that particular film and that moment in time, because of the themes of the film. We've already mentioned that it could be potentially a war film, specifically, making a statement or drawing things off from the Vietnam era, but it's also, any lovers of science fiction, cyberpunk in particular, will appreciate the Cameron's anti-corporate storylines. We hate the corporations because they're all about the profit. The company, which was Weyland-Yutani, and then he added the D to make it Wayland. So it really does come across as people talking about what they love and why they love it. I think also, I like the fact that it wasn't a making of documentary, but there were explanations on how they pulled certain things off. In terms of the visual effects, in terms of the musical score, all of that, and how influential the musical score is as well. From James Horner, because they use that sort of percussion, banging, the anvils banging in so many movie trailers since, and it was also towards the end of Die Hard they reused that bit, didn't they? So there was so much in there, but I just want to touch on a couple of things that really stood out for me. First off, I was shocked by the tea lady story. I hadn't heard that one, so that was new to me.
I'm glad,
But what I love,
it's one of those sort of legends that hover in the air, and I thought, all I can do is lean into it. And the interview with Cameron was going very well. He was in a kind of warm and funny mood, which I think comes across in the doc, that he was, he was up for a bit of a laugh. And and I said, look, what is the truth about the tea lady? And he just, okay, I'll tell you the tea lady story. And of course, it's in the doc. And it's the full unexpurgated James Cameron, take on it, which is hilarious.
Yeah,
And
it is. And
him,
what I was going to say, what I loved about that is it played out as if somebody was telling the story in a motion picture. So think of any story, whether it's by a campfire or somebody sitting in an armchair and telling this story. And it's almost set up. I think I know where he's going with this. He tells that story so well, like, you know what I'm going to do, don't you? He doesn't say it, but you can see in his eyes. If you've never heard it, you think, oh my God, he's not going to turn around and wreck the whole thing. And yes, he does. So I think that was one of the things that caught me by surprise. James Remar's casting, then disappearance was a mystery. So to learn that, I think, was fascinating. And it closed for me a little bit of a chapter that was unknown. I never realized why he couldn't finish the role, although in a way it worked out quite well with Michael Biehn. But there's one thing I really want to touch on is, and I absolutely love because it fits in with my day job, is the statement or the focus on the 3 types of leadership that the film portrays. That you've got the officer who's probably promoted a bit way above his abilities, Gorman, who actually redeems himself at the end. And then you've got Apone, played by the late Al Matthews, who I think the military consultant, I forget his name now, but made the observation that actually in the unit, the staff sergeant or the sergeant major is more respected as a leader than anybody above them, which comes across strongly. And finally, of course, you've got Ripley, the alpha, the take charge, doesn't have a plan, but instinctively knows, right, okay, this is what we need to do. And as you say, we both agreed, she gets things done. I really, really love that sort of triangular sort of breakdown, pyramid breakdown, if you like.
Yeah, and I think, it's really interesting. Cameron himself is a natural leader. He is something of a mix, I think, between Ripley and Apone. And because he can be a bit indomitable on set. There are many tales, tea lady aside, he can be a force of nature. But I think there's a bit of self-exploration going on in Aliens about his own sense of leadership. And Ridley was a natural leader too, in that you can't get great films made unless you have a natural leader in charge of them. So it's a really interesting subject for a film because it's a bit self-reflective. But obviously, you come back to the Vietnam element, is that soldiers in Vietnam didn't fight for the cause. They didn't fight, for America. They fought for the man next to them. They fought for the brother beside them, that to stay alive and protect, that's how the unit worked. And Cameron knew that and understood in portraying the Marines, you get this sense of they would fight for each other until death. And they followed Apone because he was one of them. He gave them a hard time, that's the sergeant major. But Gorman was not, they didn't know Gorman and he wasn't a brother. He sort of becomes, he does earn his redemption, of course, but he breaks down under stress. He has no idea of experience. And I think with Ripley, obviously there is experience, but as the first film showed us, Ripley has a thing that's, I don't know, what you study in your own sort of work, but she has natural leadership. Yes. And that doesn't just mean you impress other people. It means you can't help but take charge, And for me, the best scene in the film is the point where she has to, where Gorman is cracking up. The soldiers are falling apart in the hive. They've completely misjudged it, and it's all going wrong. Beautifully constructed on sort of the shots inside the hive, the screens, the black and white crackling footage, and the shots of Gorman and Ripley in the APC. And it's a kind of wheels turning, Cameron says. You can see the wheels turning in her head. And it's a decision. And the whole film pivots on that moment, that understanding that I have to take charge. And that will not necessarily make me likable, although she's warmer in Aliens than she is in Alien. Because, the ethos of the entire franchise is listen to Ripley and none of this crap would happen, And Aliens, don't let Kane back on board, quarantine rules are there for a reason, and don't go back to, to LV-426, all our instincts are completely right. But she she has these incredible leadership skills. And I think some of it has to do with Cameron's mother, who is an extraordinary woman by all accounts. And I think all his incredible female characters, Sarah Connor and Meredith Mastrantonio in The Abyss. Right, Jamie Lee Curtis, all these kind of different sort of quantities and qualities, these great female characters are reflections and refractions of his mother, who was, I think by all accounts, a very powerful woman. And and it's a brilliant, as you say, it's just a brilliant sort of thematic exploration of, in times of crisis, what emerges in the human nature.
And I think what's also lovely about the documentary is it is a love letter to the film, to the ideas behind the film and the characters, but also it features the fans. It does justice, I think, because there is a tendency to sometimes look at fandom, especially when it can at times online be a little bit toxic, but to lump fandom as something that is a bit weird, a bit geeky and nerdy, when actually what you've got is highly intelligent, passionate people who are showing a love for something that's had an impact. And that really does come across in your documentary about that. How important was it to give substantial time to fans in the film?
It was really important, and one of the great challenges of starting off with that Expander was how to do that, because you had it in sort of different ways. I knew I wanted to put fans in the film, and we've got sort of Jamie from Perfect Organism and Derek from Alien Theory and James Dyer, who is kind of like, he come from Empire, but he was such a huge fan. He sort of serves that he would openly admit he's the kind of complete fan himself. But he would bring that voice into the film. But also I wanted to make sure I was channeling what the backers, as fans wanted into the film. So there was a lot of, testing going on with the synopsis early on. And then we did an assembly, I think a few months before the finished film, before we had Cameron and Sigourney, and showed that to a group of the backers. And you really need to get what you look for is patterns in their response, and a lot of people say something, you have to listen to it. And I was just looking for ideas and things that would represent what they wanted. And I realized, one of the nice things I understood from that process was fans want an equal discussion of the kind of the real world filmmaking side of things, how they did it, and the world itself. What are the lives of these characters all about? What is beyond the screen in story terms? Who might these people have been before they got to LV-426? That was very important to fans to sort of think in those terms. And I think that had a huge influence on what we were doing. So yeah, absolutely. Fans are very powerful voice. They're a very important voice. I am a fan myself, so I hope I carried that with me. The bits of myself I put in came from the fact that I'd seen it in 1986 as a 16-year-old and never forgotten it, and also my journalist side as well. But I brought with me my kind of Empire head, and when I joined Empire, and I learned very quickly that it wasn't a magazine about Hollywood. It was a magazine about people who went to the multiplex on a Friday night and then wanted to talk about whatever they'd seen. That's what it was. And that's what we were channeling, at all times. Keep that head on. And I think that's now so ingrained into my DNA that everything I do is born from that. So completely, absolutely. It was about the fans. You included the fans. Fandom is a very important way of sort of expressing a sense of a film and a life of a film. You measure it in its fandom, and it doesn't mean to say, as you say, that it's something pejorative at all. I think it's a measure of how good a film is by how good a fandom is, and how good that fandom responds to that film, and all the incredible things they come up with. I mean, what drove me mad was that I would do some research on one part of what we were looking at, and there'll be such good things online. There'll be so brilliant takes. And I would just get a bit confused and dizzy trying to think, oh, how do I get all this in? That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Oh my God, someone else has thought of that, and this has happened with The Thing as well. You just go down rabbit holes of analysis and you just, at some point, you just got to call a halt to it or you'll never get anything done. But yes, it takes my breath away. Exactly what fans have come up with and continue to come up with. We're 40 years, into the life of Aliens, and not only does the film feel very fresh still, but people's fandom, which has probably existed for 25 of those 40 years and in a serious way, has kind of stayed fresh as well. They always come up with something new. There's always something brilliant being done. There's always a new kind of perspective. And that's thrilling to me. It's why I do what I do. And I think it's why these expanded documentaries exist, is it's a kind of reflection of that.
Yes. We can't talk about Aliens or Aliens Expanded without mentioning Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
I think of all the people, he is the most missed. And whenever someone like him passes, it is sad. And there's a lot of reflection. But one thing I really appreciated and noticed in Aliens Expanded is that it's not so much the time that was given to talk about Paxton and the importance of his approach and his character of Hudson, but he got a proper tribute, because I think even obituaries and discussions can sometimes not always do a life justice. And I think certainly there was a lot of conversation about what he brought to the set that you could then see that he'd carried on into other films. Like, for example, the lines that he would come up.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember reading in Empire, funnily enough, it was a feature on True Lies. And I can't remember, I think it was an interview with Paxton himself, where they asked him, where do you get all these lines from? And they sort of mentioned some of the things he said in other films. And he said, my father. He said, my father would say things like, she's got breasts that would make you stand up and beg for buttermilk, which is his character's line in True Lies. He says, I just get all these things from my dad and I just throw them in. And James Cameron absolutely loves it. So I guess my question is, were you aware when asking people to share their memories of Paxton that this was going to be an important tribute to him? Not just as an actor playing Hudson, but I suppose in a way his sort of most memorable work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill Paxton, the great regret through all of it is the one interview. Obviously Al Matthews as well, but to have spoken to Bill Paxton would have been just wonderful, and to have included him. So knowing he wasn't with us and knowing that how beloved the character is and how beloved the actor was something I knew we had to kind of focus on. It goes back to this idea that it's a love story, this whole documentary, and a lot of that love is focused on Bill Paxton. And it was kind of a case of, how do I do him justice? And always in the synopsis there was a section based on Bill Paxton's contribution. I wasn't 100% sure exactly what shape it would take until I started speaking to people. And I just had a question, really, which was just simply, what is your memory of Bill Paxton? And, from Lance to Jeanette to Mark Rolston, they were all three early interviews. The answers started to get very emotional very quickly. And I thought, oh my God, at this time, I think Cynthia, she got very tearful. And,
yes, I noticed that.
And she laughed, and Mark Rolston was so sort of kind of strong that it was one of the early bits I edited, and we didn't change it. Once we got it, I think I added Cameron when I did him later, because obviously you have to add it in. But actually, he's not the dominant voice in that section. If you watch it, he's there, but it's really Rolston and Cynthia. It's the fellow actors who carry that story. Michael Biehn, fantastic on him. And we edited that, and a lot of the other stuff kind of went back and forth and changed and sort of got adapted as you go along, as the editing process is. That stayed the same. And I remember showing bits of it to my boss, Robin, and it was my first documentary. I think he wanted to see sections to make sure I wasn't hopeless. Yeah, he had to reassure himself that there was going to be a documentary at the end of all this. And I sent him the Paxton section, and he said I was tearful, and that was long before all the music was in and all that. He said, it's just magnificent, and it gave me real confidence once I'd done that section. Once Chema, my composer, added the music, and he got it so right, just that section. As I say, I remember saying to Sam, my editor, I said, we're not touching it. Once we got Cameron in, and I said to him, don't let me touch it. Don't let me go back in. Just lock it off. Whatever tools you can use, fix it, and we won't touch it because it works. And we never did, and it stayed as it is. And I think a lot of people have said to me, I love that piece. I just love, you kind of, when you make a documentary, of course, it's about information and story. But like a feature film, it's an emotional journey. You are trying to create emotions, humor and excitement and sort of sadness and melancholy. That's a powerful human feeling. And I've come to learn that, in some ways, what the expanders do is as much about what it may make you feel as what they tell you. If people have a feeling, because you're investing in people's feelings, ultimately, their feeling for the film. And that's why I think the Paxton piece was so crucial to the mix.
Absolutely. Like I said, I totally agree with that. And it was, I think actually I went very quiet when they were all talking, because you and I mean, we grew up with Bill Paxton. I mean, so many, but he's been in so much before and since then. Near Dark, Twister, Apollo 13. I mean, he's such a formidable presence. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, 40 years. I mean, my God, where does the time go?
What's happened to my 16-year-old self 40 years ago?
15-year-old who snuck into an old wartime cinema called the Gaiety, which used to be up the road from where I lived. Sadly, well, now it's a residential home. And 40 years later, people are still talking about it, and you've made the documentary. And so to celebrate this, you are re-releasing Aliens Expanded.
Yes.
But with some very, very tasty sounding features. So people want to order their copy of this Aliens Expanded, if you like. Yeah. What can we expect from your special edition?
Yes, this is the special edition is I call the collector's edition, and it's got what it has is majority of the interviews, not all of them, have been edited so they're unedited, if that makes sense. They're kind of full interview, and they're rambling, kind of, natural selves, just telling their stories. The questions are, because you don't hear my voice, so we've got some sort of interstitial graphics to come up with my question on, and then they respond to that. And in a sense, they're not documentary pieces, because they are a bit sort of rambly and discursive, but they are almost like a lovely podcast. What I like about having all the interviews, so they run to about an hour and a half, if not longer, of James Cameron. And he sort of goes off at tangents. It has all those kind of bits where you wouldn't necessarily put it in the doc because it's a bit sort of complex. But it has a beautiful sense of other stories he's telling, talking about Terminator and other things. And then Sigourney, we've got doing that. So it's all the major interviews. And as I say, I like to think of them as sort of something you could put on in the background and just have playing as you're kind of doing other things, very much like a podcast, where it's just like they're just sort of alongside you having a chat about aliens. Less formed, there's no clips and there's no kind of music. It's really just them talking. But I think it just gives you another dimension. And you've got then sort of deleted scenes and all the things that sort of came on the original set. And you've got, I think there's a kind of Q&A with me and Robin accounting for ourselves. But those are the kind of the interviews, the full interviews. And obviously you take out things that, like, they stumble and it's a bit kind of doesn't make any sense. You just tidy that up. And any kind of great repetitions you take out, but pretty much it's the full interview as they were done in person. And I think they've worked really well. I think that they're really nice. You watch the documentary and they're another dimension, another way of, if you can't get enough aliens, here's even more of it.
Okay, and where can people, obviously I'll put the links up and everything, where can people place their orders?
It's aliensexpanded.com. And we're up for about I think 2 more weeks or however long, from this podcast onwards. And it's 40th anniversary. It's we kind of wanted to celebrate as well. We knew it was coming, and we just wanted to get the documentary out there for all those who haven't yet got it or haven't yet watched it. And you know, people seem to love it. People have told me they love it, and I think it serves the film very well. It was a gift to the film from me, and now it's the 40th birthday of the film. I wanted just to get it alongside the film again for people who are passionate about aliens, and that's what it is. If you haven't seen the film, it really spoils it.
Well, yes.
Yeah. So watch Aliens first before you watch the documentary.
I think that's really good advice. I think this is for people who know the film and have seen the film.
Then that was the assumption we made, and you could work with him. Now you didn't have to explain who Ripley was. Exactly that people knew.
This may be controversial, but I gotta ask, which do you prefer, original cinema cut or the special edition?
I'm quite sure that I like the theatrical cut more. I'm interested in the added scenes, but I don't think the story benefits from them. I think you have to stay with Ripley. You have to not know what's gone on LV-46 and Hadley's Hope, until you get there. It has to be a mystery story in terms of, if you get the flashbacks to Newt and her parents, it's just too much. It's the ghost town works better without knowing what it was like beforehand. To me, it's got, it's the way that Cameron sort of does things with the original film. It's like The Derelict, it's that echo of a disaster that's already happened, and that's kind of what he was hinting at. The point we get in Aliens, we get to the Hadley's Hope is echoes the same point. Kane and Lambert and Dallas get to the Derelict, and you don't want to know what happened on the Derelict, and thankfully we still don't. And so that mystery is important to me. I like the guns, the Sentry guns. I don't know if you 100% need them. If I watch the theatrical, I don't miss them. So I do believe firmly that the better cut, the more propulsive and absorbing cut is the original theatrical. I think they got that right.
And lastly, what are your favorite moments of the film?
Well, I mentioned my favorite moment is Ripley taking control of the APC. That great sort of percussive score kicks in, and just that. Not only is she's the natural leader taking charge, she already has a solution. She's already figured out what to do. Not only that she must take charge, she has a way of getting them out. She's going to drive this APC into the side of the nest and get them. And I love that. I love the way the whole film pivots on that. I'm endlessly kind of in admiration for Cameron's ability to create character on the move, that he never stops to build, exploit, let's have a conversation about our past back on Earth, do you remember when, but we learn those characters within beats. You learn who Hicks is, you learn who Hudson is within a very small amount of time. It should be studied, Aliens, by young screenwriters for what is important in storytelling on screen.
Yes.
This kind of age where every film seems to come with in sort of interminable sense of you've got to have done your homework first and know all this stuff. You don't need to even know about Alien to understand Aliens. You get it. And I think I love those kind of moments with the Marines. I love Hicks. I Bihn's performance and the way his character emerges and the kind of strength of him. I love Hudson and his one-liners. The way, it's such a human response. Well, that's just great. And we all feel like Hudson in most days of our life. What now?
Very true. Very true.
Fresh hell is this? All right. So there's so many bits I really kind of love. The confrontation with the Queen is still magnificent. I love that little bit where Ripley goes into the nest to get Newt, sort of gets Newt, and then enters the main egg chamber, and there's a sort of quiet and all you hear is the sort of breathing sound.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly Cameron reveals the Queen to us. I
Yes.
love that sort of pause, and you look up with Ripley. And Ripley, who knows and has experienced this creature, sort of understands it all fits into place. Oh, I get it now, of course. Plus, it's this kind of sense straight away of mother versus mother. Immediately is presented to us. And
Yes.
I love that. I thought that's just brilliant film conceptual work from Cameron.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the things that work with that, you're like, oh, so good. It's again simple in some ways. It's not fussy. It's very kind of beautifully delivered. So there's a real elegance to Aliens that people forget. They think, oh, it's a great action movie. It's incredibly exciting. Of course, it also is those things.
Yeah.
There's a real elegance to how it's done. The kind of the rhythms of it and the pace of it.
Absolutely.
He's never credited. It sounds absurd, but he's never credited enough in my eyes as a filmmaker. He's always talked about Cameron, the blockbuster guy, and Cameron gives us this, that, and the other. But we never stop to think about it and compare him to Spielberg or Scorsese and say, what's he like as a guy who tells stories, as a filmmaker? And he's so talented and so, because he works in a popular medium rather, I suppose, compared to even Spielberg, who varies. I don't think he gets the credit for that he's a supremely good filmmaker.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Cine Bijou podcast. As you can see, the lights are dimming, the curtain is pulled back, and we're thrilled to pick up season 2 where we left off. From here on out, we'll be seeing you at least once a month with fresh episodes exploring the world of independent film. To keep up to date with latest episodes, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you love what we're doing, the best way to help us grow is to subscribe, like, and share the show with your fellow cinephiles. We also want to hear from you, so please leave a comment on our latest episode and join the conversation. Finally, if you'd like to help keep the projector running, consider supporting us over on Patreon for exclusive rewards. Now, let's get into this month's feature. What got you into filmmaking? Why you chose that as a profession, as a passion? And who were your inspirations and influences as a filmmaker?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rohan. My name is Guy Trevelyan. I am living in London. I kind of started in film from a very young age. I grew up just south of London and near a very famous film location called the Bourne Woods. Which is where you'll probably remember the first battle scene of Gladiator is where that was. So we went to trips there when I was a kid with my parents, and then after school we would ride our bikes into the woods and watch all the amazing sets and filming that was happening. So I was exposed to cinema from a very young age, but I studied history at university, and then after I finished uni, I really realized I wanted to work in film, but I didn't know anyone. So that's where I kind of went to the Met Film School, banging on their door for some experience and some help. And I ended up doing a master's with them, which kind of just opened the door to meeting like-minded people like me who don't necessarily have a connection to the industry, but really want to find out, learn more, learn the basics and go from there. So that was where the whole journey started, which is, nearly 10 years ago now. And then after that, I went straight into the industry working as an assistant director. And then this is my kind of debut. I mean, in terms of inspirations, do you mean like people in terms of directors or like things like that? Or
yeah, in terms of directors, anyone in film who's particularly inspired you, especially if they were auteurs and told a particular story. Because I mean, the story we're going to be talking about in a minute with plastic surgery is quite. It's a dark subject because it's a very real subject, and also the way you present it is both satirical and shocking. So I was just kind of just judging from that alone. I'm curious as to who your influences are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cronenberg's style of body horror and that kind of stuff obviously plays a part, but I mean, for me, my main inspirations probably comes from Denis Villeneuve. The darkness of his films. He did a short film called The Next Floor, which not many people know about, but it's a beautiful film. And it's all about how Mother Nature can't keep up with the rate that we're consuming the natural world. So it's a brilliant short, and it's a metaphorical short, and it just made me realize that what I wanted to do was possible. And so he was a big influence. Wes Anderson was another big influence, just in terms of the scripts, the dialogue, the visuals, the detail that he would go into. I ended up luckily working for him for a long time, and I was able to get a good insight into his process of filmmaking, with the animatic they make, the storyboard, and certainly the directing style. I took most of my inspiration from Wes for that. How he interacts with cast members, how everything is prepped, how everything is organized, is really important. And prep is probably the most important part of filmmaking, even more so, some would say, than production itself. So I think Wes taught me that, and taught me a lot of things from that. And then I mean, all the usual greats really that I used to grow up watching, Spielberg to Scorsese. In terms of horror, I started to look a lot of Ari Aster's work, and who's just absolutely phenomenal in the kind of horror scene at the moment. But even taking quite a lot of inspiration really from the brothers, the Raka Raka brothers, who did the Talk to Me and the Bring Her Back as well. And I mean, Zach Kreger, I mean, just like big horror names. And then Greta Gerwig, who I worked with, like, very briefly on Barbie. She, her directing style and how she works with cast and how she sits under the camera and watches their physical performance. She doesn't look at a monitor. So it's a very close connection she has with the cast while they're performing. She's right there with them. So those are probably my biggest inspirations here.
Well, you've been very sort of fortunate to have a role whereby you get to work closely with these people and who've influenced you and inspired you, but you've got to learn from them as well and feed that stuff what they've taught you into your own work. So when did you decide to go out on your own as a director? Is this your first film, or?
Plastic Surgery was my first film. That's my first film. I kind of made the decision during COVID, actually, because COVID was that period of time where everyone was making a change on how they were going to operate in the film industry. And I've been working as an AD, and I love assistant directing, and I continue doing it to today. I still love assistant directing, anything from short films to high-end TV to feature films. But I made the jump to try writing. I love writing. I love coming up with stories, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself a writer. Is a weird thing still for me to say, because I love coming up with ideas. I love coming up with stories. But part of my dyslexia, my brain, how it works is I very much like to write very descriptively and very visually. So I kind of gave it a go during COVID and wrote the first draft of Plastic Surgery, then shelved it for many years, while I started working more in the AD industry and working as assistant director and really building up that credits and stepping up. And then I think it wasn't until the writer's strike, that I then was like, oh, I actually have a window here to make the film. And I just thought, if I don't do it now, I'll never try it. And I, got a casting director on board, got our producer Sophie Stacey on board, who I AD'd. She was the producer on A Matter of Minutes, and she works with Slick Films, which is very big up in the short film world. And she really helped me, into that short film area, and supported me to make this short. And then we went for it. We, wrote the script, rewrote the script again, went back at it. We managed to get a casting director on board, got Anna Popplewell on board. And when she came on board, that's when everything changed, because she revealed that she would be 6-7 months pregnant during filming. So I rewrote the role.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Rewrote the role based on the fact that she was going to be pregnant. So she said that to me in the call with her. I didn't know that prior. So I rewrote the script for her, basically, which I was very happy to do, because it added so much to the character. It changed the whole story. It made it a character narrative and character driven story, which allows us in the end to just be a lot closer and emotionally connect to her. And she represents Mother Nature in the film. So, that's kind of how it all worked.
Okay, well, let's talk about plastic surgery then. So I saw this film, as I said to you, at Holly Shorts. It was, I believe it was in the science fiction, horror, fantasy classification of screening. And what made it so impactful is that I had no idea what to expect going in. There was a brief premise on all the guidance, on all the programs, although I don't think people read those. They just go in and like to be surprised.
Yeah.
And boy, were we surprised, because you really took everyone there on a very, very dark journey. So the film's called Plastic Surgery, as I mentioned, and it is about the last night of Tara, who is a doctor working in what the Americans call the ER, we call A&E, dealing with all these cases coming in. And it does turn into a bit of a horror fest, but there's a message behind this film, isn't there, about microplastics, about waste. So where did you get the idea to fuse thriller with body horror and a very, very important social message?
Thank you, Ramon. Great question. Essentially, my sister used to work for the Ocean Agency, which is a not-for-profit, a brilliant organization which looks at the effects of global warming and climate change on coral reefs around the world. And when she was working for them, it kind of unlocked an access for me to kind of see really the harm that we put on marine life around the world. Just through our toxic waste, our presence, our pollution, the increasing temperature globally, how that's affecting marine life, the waste that's constantly going into the ocean. And so I started looking at plastic pollution. And after watching Denis Villeneuve's next short film, The Next Floor, I realized I wanted to kind of do a metaphor film. I wanted to look at that. How would that look? So I came up with this idea of a team of doctors that were dealing with patients that had plastic physically coming out of their body. And that came about from purely researching a lot of research into plastic pollution. And the biggest thing that came up was its effect on our health. And the amount of research that has been undertaken by some of the biggest charities in the world, the British Heart Foundation, one of the biggest, which did a study on microplastics in the plaques around our heart and our arteries, which increase our chance of heart disease and blood clotting. Lots of different things like that, loads of different charities looking at Victorian University's study of microplastics in the body and how it could have effects of affect our cells, our sperm count, our birth defect rate, so many different variables. And it's still something that we really don't fully understand just how bad this is going to affect us going way into the future now. Which is a very scary premise. And, there's some outrageous facts out there about how much plastic we consume and how much goes through our body. One study even suggests that a credit card amount of plastic passes through our brain every week, which is quite a substantial amount. And because, especially if you live in a city like I do, you drink water, if it's not filtered, there's microplastics in your water, there's microplastics in the food, there's microplastics in the air, there's microplastics in the clothes you wear, the synthetics. But even in the countryside, you can't escape it. It's still in the food supply, it's around our food packaging in supermarkets. It's still within the water supply. If you live a predominantly fish-based diet or seafood diet, lots of these quite scary research that we did. So that's where the story was really inspired by. And that's where I wrote the first draft. And obviously it was during COVID, so I must have had this kind of idea of disease on my mind and very much the films like Contagion spring to mind, which really enlightened me. And it was scary to the world to see how similar what happened during COVID was in Contagion. The only difference, they said the exact same language, the only difference was the timescale, but the language was exactly the same used, which was pretty scary. So yeah, that was kind of where the idea came from.
Okay, so it's not only inspired, but it's informed your work. And it's interesting that this came about during COVID, and it bears some relation to COVID in terms of its spread and impact on us. I guess also it's being treated like COVID in that there's quite a lot of people who aren't taking it very seriously.
Yeah.
They're not seeing this as an immediate threat like with
Mm.
COVID. I mean, okay, we've come through that. So, is this why you chose particularly, well, horror in general, but particularly body horror with a bit of satire to deliver the message that if people aren't going to listen to the facts and to the experts, then we're going to use art
Yeah.
to get the
Yeah,
message across?
absolutely. Absolutely. Part of the idea was, you know, a lot of the plastic pollution crisis and around the world is very hard to connect to people that might not have ever seen the sea, been to the sea, lived by the sea, and the only connection to it really is what you read online. So how do you really, you know, really strike a chord globally with people? And often, sadly, just the fact that we're human, we tend to listen more when our own health comes under threat. And in terms of microplastics, when you understand the health effects that it's going to have on us, and it is having on us, then you start to really listen because suddenly it's affecting you personally. It's not affecting the turtle that lives in the ocean 1,000 miles away. It's affecting you. And that is what we really wanted to look at. We wanted to show something that was visually striking, tonally dark, and more of a warning message. It's not guilt. It's not about guilt. I remember reading something about that and someone mentioned a comment, should we feel guilty? It's not really about that because at the end of the day, there's an onus on both the individual and the government or country and where you live and where you're from. As an individual, you can only do so much. You can try and reduce your plastic intake by having a water bottle or trying not to buy as much plastic items, trying to buy food locally and having clean filtered water supply. But the problem is that isn't available around the world, as much as we think. We live in a Western world, maybe it's different here, but if you look in a lot of different places, there isn't clean water. In most of the world, they don't have access to that. They don't have the infrastructure built up to support an environmental way of living. And so it's not about guilt, it's about education. It's a warning, but it's also, it's just really trying to have a small impact of trying to change the little things you can do as an individual to make a change. But yeah.
So, in terms of getting people on board, you said you got Anna Popwell on board. I mean, that seemed like that was a no-brainer for her to do, that she seemed passionate about that. What
Yeah.
was your approach to her asking you to be involved?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, in terms of how we approached Anna, we have a casting director, Stevie Davies. Whenever I write something, I always kind of picture someone in my mind in the role. And you know what it's like with film, it often is right place, right time. It doesn't often work out. But in this case, it really did because I'd pictured Anna in the role. I'd seen her in a play in Birmingham and then something in London, I remember. And I really wanted to work with her, and I thought she was such an amazing actress, a great actor, and someone that would be great to work with. And I also just think she had this quality of her, this very kind of this very earthly, motherly tone of warmth, underneath her, and she's a very well experienced actor. She's a child actor that's grown up in that industry, but it was a no-brainer really. So what I tend to do is I write a personal letter to the actor, and within that letter I write about the character, who the character is to me, what the story is, how I'd like to collaborate with them, what is the meaning of this project, why now, why do I think she'd be great for this type of role. And I just, I wanted to make something personal to her, and then after she'd read that and she'd read the script, then she was like, let's get a phone call, let's do it, let's have a chat about it. And that's where she revealed she was pregnant. So, and then from then on, I think she only wanted to do it. She wanted to do it if I was okay to incorporate that into the story, of course. And of course I was, because it really enhanced her character, because what better way of representing Mother Nature than a pregnant woman, on the verge of giving life, and that is the epitome of Mother Nature. Really, is something, a being that holds life within and nurtures life. And so I think that just ended up, she obviously tapped into that during the filming, having that, being able to tap into that emotion because she was actually pregnant was something that you could really see in the performance. I mean, she was incredible. It was very easy to direct her, to be honest.
So can I just ask, because there was another film there that particularly at Holly Shorts that particularly stood out using body horror to talk about current issues. That was Pearls by Alistair Train.
Oh yeah, I've seen Pearls. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was talking about fertility
Yeah.
and the issues that some people face. What is it about horror and satirical horror especially that makes it such a good platform for very important issues that need addressing?
It's a great question. I mean, honestly, I'd say for me, the point of these messages, I mean, when you've got something like fertility with Alistair's or something like plastic pollution for mine, a way of really gripping people's attention. Horror has a way of, I mean, it's really, horror gets a bad rep sometimes because people associate horror with jump scare or whatever that is. But it's not the case to me, really. To me, it's there's so many different forms of horror. And the idea behind it is that we really start to tap into allowing the audience to see something quite visually striking, which can often change their mind or shock them into a new type of information, but also allows you to write characters that can be quite vulnerable in that horror setting, and therefore you can connect with them really well. I mean, so many horror films I see at the moment are just getting better and better because their characters are so complex and they hold so much emotional weight. I mean, recently watching, Bring Her Back. I mean, that I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's all about a grieving mother and the lengths that someone would go just to bring their daughter back. And, I mean, horror just has this amazing ability. And if you can attach that, this kind of genre filmmaking, if you can attach that to modern day problems, human issues and stories, you can actually tap into something that's quite surreal. And it's different, it's unique, and it's really striking. So I think it kind of takes away the limitations as well for me when you write, because suddenly there's no limit on what you can see, what you can do. And I think it's just a great platform to work with. So yeah, I mean, horror for me with an environmental message comes hand in hand because what's happening out there in the world is horrific. That's also the case, that it's not far off horror naturally without even adding the extra stuff that's happening now. It is a pretty dire position that we're in. So, you can't really treat it necessarily. I mean, what we did with plastic surgery is we used a touch of comedy to kind of trick the audience at the beginning, which I know you touched on. The idea was that we wanted to lure the audience in and trick, in a way, kind of trick you into a bit of self-assurance and feeling like this, okay, this is going to be this type of film. So that when it hits hard, then when it switches, it hits even harder. And you're thrown, and being thrown makes you it takes you back a bit, and you get to really understand the world that you're then going into. And it doesn't just shout at you. We kind of build up this tension, and then just the fact that it was, plastics and microplastics there in the human body, it felt like the kind of subject of body horror was the perfect element. And Substance had just come out. Actually, no, Substance came out after we'd made this film.
Yeah.
I think, but you can clearly see that body horror is having a big resurgence at the moment, and horror filmmakers are getting really graphic with their filmmaking, but they're doing it in a very, very clever, abstract ways, and making sure that the character comes first.
Now, this film is particular. I wouldn't say it's full-on effects laden, but there's some stunning practical makeup effects in there because as the problem gets worse, you obviously need to demonstrate just how bad that is. You've got someone coming in riddled with plastic Coke bottles. I mean, you don't point out that they're Coke, but it's obvious they are. So, how did you? So, what was involved in bringing those effects to life? Who did you hire, and how long did it all take?
Yeah. So we had an amazing prosthetics hair and makeup designer called Rebecca Wheeler. She's actually doing my next film. She's brilliant, absolutely incredible. She founded a company called the Prosthetics House in 2024, I think. And she was incredible. I mean, she had very little prep, very little time to prepare, but we had been talking for a while about these kind of plastic patients that we wanted to create. So we decided that we wanted 10 of them in the hospital ward, and out of these 10 patients, we wanted to kind of express the ways in which plastic transfers into the body. And then if you flip that on how it can seep out of the body, how would that look? So we started to look at, well, let's look at the air that we breathe, right? So the plastic that goes through the air goes into our lungs. So what could we do that's from the chest that could be something to do with the air pollution, something to do with that. So we started to look at some chest prosthetics. We did water throat, we did bottles, we did six-pack rings around the throat, we did straws in the throat. I looked at packaging for clothes and looked at bubble wrap. So then we looked at starting to create this kind of, because the texture of bubble wrap almost looks like a cell structure. So like skin. So we started to play with putting bubble wrap underneath the skin, and then if you would to cut and reveal, puzzle pieces of the skin, you'd see this bubble wrap underneath, as if the whole insides are now covered with bubble wrap. That was quite a powerful image to create. And then we looked at food packaging in the gut, in the stomach, coming out with someone. We looked at toothbrushes that were stuck underneath the skin and the bristles were piercing through. We looked at some horrific imagery, but we really wanted to make it striking. But we didn't want to film it so, still wanted it to be abstract, flashes, quick shots, to really heighten the horror. And then Anna's prosthetic was very different. She had a completely different prosthetic, which was kind of this gradual increase in plastic from within. So what starts with a small piece, a plastic cup section that she finds in her arm, showing that she's now infected, that she tries to pull on. When she then gets into the final room, we reveal all of these items that are washed up from the sea underneath her skin, basically piercing through, from picnic forks and bottle the kind of plastic lids to microplastic beads to food packaging, wrapping, PPE equipment. We even looked at for because I wanted to have that link in there to COVID, of all the protective equipment that went into that. And it was just ironic that what we used to then protect ourselves would be dumped into the ocean, which effectively then goes back to harming ourselves anyway. So it's a kind of counterintuitive life cycle, which is a classic human way of dealing with a problem. But it's a really, yeah, that was how, so yeah, Rebecca created that. In terms of the time scale and how long we filmed it, I mean, it's hard to believe, but actually we did most of the prosthetics all on one day. We filmed the main hospital ward, the girl with the throat gag, and another scene all on one day. And that was about 13 prosthetics that Rebecca did on that day. And that was our biggest day. I think we did something like 44 or 45 slates setups that day alone, within 10 hours. So it was tight. We had a lot to film, but yeah.
Well, yeah, you've certainly covered a lot, and it shows in the finished film. You mentioned the quick flashes in between each reveal of what the person is either having removed or is bringing up. I have to admit, I thought that was a really clever technique you used, those quick flashes, because on the one hand, you are showing something that's quite graphic and is not for everybody. But by putting in the flashes, it certainly made me question, did I just see what I thought I saw? Like a can ring around someone's neck? Did I just see bottles coming out? And it makes you want to actually look closer.
Yeah.
To just verify that that's what you saw.
It gives you just enough of like a
Exactly.
interest. And then when it goes, you're like, whoa, what was that? And
Yeah.
you know, the inspiration for that was actually from the David Fincher who I should have mentioned is another big inspiration of mine, who
Mhm.
did the film Seven, of course, which I'm sure you've seen. I've seen it
Yes.
probably about 100
Yes, I know
times.
Seven very well.
But that in the film, that has probably one of the most horrific images I've ever seen on camera. Just purely how it's filmed and just which is the lust device, which I think he shows in one shot on a
Oof.
Polaroid in literally 1 second. It's a
Hmm.
bam and gone.
Yes.
And it's really scary. And even actually when they had the whole in the box scene, if you pause it, there's a frame over the box where we then see Gwyneth Paltrow's face looking up, which would have been her on the bed with Kevin Spacey.
Mhm.
It's these he utilizes flashes really, really well, which is very, very clever. So we took a lot of inspiration from that.
Mm. And it does work well because horror, through not intentionally, but horror can have this effect of making people look away because
Yeah,
oh that's too graphic, that's too horrible. But the flashes, like I said, they draw you in to look closer because you need to check that you saw what you saw. And I suppose
mm,
with an important message that's carried in plastic surgery, you need people paying attention, not looking away because it's too. I
yeah,
mean, that's what we do in real life. We don't want to talk about these issues. So it's a really good way of pulling the audience in and making them pay attention to what you're trying to tell them in the story. So
yeah.
I really did pick up on that, and I thought you used that really well. This is
Mm.
good technique. So, in terms of the film's message and reception, then, first off, have you screened this to environmental groups and scientists and experts who are studying and trying to warn us about this
Yeah.
thing going on? Uh, and if so, what was their reaction?
Oh, I mean, the reaction has been incredible. Just in terms of the people that have seen it, the different charities that we were trying to work with and have had a relationship with, like Kids Against Plastic, for our seas health. We've done quite a few environmental film festivals like Cine Eco in Portugal, which if you haven't been, I'd really recommend. It was one of my favorite festivals so far of the season, and that's in a town called Ceia, which is probably 2 hours inland of Lisbon, and it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, environmental film festival in Europe. It was founded in the early 90s. And for a festival to found as being a completely environmental festival at that time was very rare that you ever had that around the world. And they focused predominantly on environmental, and they're now one of the biggest ones in Europe. And they even premiered Flow, which won the Academy Award for animation. And we went and we won the best international short film with plastic surgery there in October, I think, last year. And they were phenomenal. It was, yeah, absolutely incredible festival. As I said, they were amazing. We saw some incredible films there, and they actually what was really cool, and we didn't know about this, but when we had the screening of the film, they invited 2 or 3 schools to the screening. So kids around the age of 11 up to 18 watched the film. And I was not expecting that. And their reaction was incredible because I really wasn't sure what kids would think of it or, even being able to show it to an age group that young, being, 11-year-olds as well. But the reaction was amazing. A lot of the reaction was, should I be worried for my parents? What do I need to do myself? Is there a way that we can start to avoid plastics, like by having, they were avidly really wanting to make a change
Mhm.
and learn and understand more about the issue. And it was interesting that one of the first things that came to their minds was, should I be worried for my family and the plastic intake that they have? What can we be doing as a family? And these are questions coming from 11, 12-year-olds.
That's
And I
incredible.
look back to when I was 11 or 12, and I was definitely not thinking about plastic pollution. So it's amazing to see
Mhm.
how that's evolved. And what's great about this community in Saya is because the festival's been there now for 35, 40 years, it's become a part of their community, a part of their culture. And kids have been going to that festival as part of their schooling every year since, so what it breeds is essentially very environmentally aware children who then go off into the world being very environmentally conscious. And that's the power of environmental filmmaking is that, if you're able to change the minds and make the younger generation very knowledgeable and understand in a way that suits them, which is quick, short films. It's very attention gauging. The battle with attention spans of younger generation. You need something that's quite fast and punchy that gets your point across quickly. And this is what we tried to do with plastic surgery. That's exactly what we tried to do. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the reaction that we've had immediately.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I'm going to have to read about Cine Echo. That sounds fantastic, and I
Yeah,
think at
please
this
do.
time it's just what's needed.
Yeah.
So, so moving forward with the film, then, what's the next step in driving and promoting the film? Because it's gone to festivals. We mentioned Cine Echo. We mentioned Holly Shorts as well, which is a big sort of uh, multi-genre film festival for short films. What's next in terms of driving the message to where it needs to go, really, which is those people who hold the purse strings and the power? Are there any plans to get the film screened in front of the people who can truly make a difference?
Yeah. So we're trying to work with some charities at the moment, Surfers Against Sewage, Greenpeace, to try and get the film out there to a bigger audience within that sphere of activism and general change. In fact, working with Kids Against Plastic, we're hoping to do something with them, very soon, which would be around the education of children at school. So being able to show this film to a certain age group of kids from 12 plus, 12 onwards, and educate kids about that issue as well. And then, in terms of the next steps, we're about halfway through the festival season currently. We're off to Glasgow Film Festival this weekend, which is Plastic Surgery is part of the Fright Fest showcase.
Okay.
So we're really, really excited about that on the Saturday. And then we're also at CineQuest next week, I believe, or the week after. And then we got, Fastnet coming up. We've got two more environmental film festivals, Sustain, and then the environmental festival in the nation's capital in DC. And then they've got Cleveland as well, RAP Film Festival in Finsbury. So there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of big stuff coming up. We've got quite a packed schedule within the incoming months because everything's starting to pick up again after the kind of quieter January, February. And so, yeah, I mean, we're just plowing through that festival circuit at the moment, getting the film out globally to as many people as we can. I think we're either close to or just over 40 festivals now with the film.
Wow.
And again, that was always the goal, to get it to as many festivals that we could globally, to spread its message and get as many people to watch it as possible. And hopefully, if one person makes a general change after seeing the film, then we would have succeeded in our mission. So that was always the goal, is just to heighten people's understanding of the issue, and maybe one day someone would change one little thing of their personal life.
As you were making the film, given the incredible reception it's gotten at film festivals and by film journalists like myself, when you were making the film, did you anticipate that this is something that would almost take on a life of its own and would carry through the festivals, through the people who've seen it with such incredible feedback? Did you get any sense at all that it would have the impact it's having?
No, not really. I mean, you really don't think about that when you're writing these and making these films, because the attention is so much on creating something which hasn't been yet. And I was watching this podcast recently, and that I think it was Greta Gerwig who was saying, these films have no right to exist without the filmmakers that make them, without the crew, the director, the writer, the producers, the DOP, the costume designer, the makeup designer, the amount of people that make this happen. And because of the how hard it is to make a film in the current market. It's everything is expensive, everything is against you, funding is limited. Independent filmmaking is tough. So I think the last thing I was thinking about really was how the film would be received. I was just hoping that we'd make it. was probably the main thing, because I mean, Ramon, it's like I'm sure you get this all the time, but it's such a struggle when you're trying to to make a short film, and so many things can go wrong because you don't have the money and the budget and the time necessarily. So you are limited in that sense, to the tools at your disposal. But that's where you've just got to write and you've got to create on the basis that you have no money, and you've got to make it work. And that's how these films evolve. And so, no, I really don't think I've ever thought about its reception, but obviously it's been such a great journey, and a great, it's so great for me to just join these film festivals and networking and meeting like-minded people, and meeting other directors and writers, and it's a great, journey to go on in the festival circuit. If you've got a film that gets into them and gives you the opportunity to go around the world and see these festivals and see people's reactions and see people's comments, it's a blessing really to be able to do that.
I'll bet. So last question then. Now, this is your first film as a writer-director, and you've got a very fascinating, recognizable but fascinating, powerful narrative style. Are your plans moving forward then to continue along these lines, to take important issues and raise them through your films?
Yeah.
Or are you looking to also go into movie making, if you like?
So I think in terms of how I like to write and make, a lot of the films I'm writing at the moment, they're all character journeys, they're character stories at the heart, but they all have a bigger message, be it social, human issues, an issue with the planet, environmentally, a human issue within ourselves. So the next project we're doing is called The Act of Learning, which is a film, it's a film about undiagnosed dyslexia. So that's all about my, personal experience with dyslexia, growing up with that, the learning support that is out there, and the teacher that helped me and basically allowed me to read and write. And without her, I would never have been able to be in the position I am today without that teaching and that support. So it's about self-belief, it's about mentorship. It's a lot more lighthearted maybe than plastic surgery. There's no body horror this time, but this is a deeper personal story to me, which looks at a coming of age story about undiagnosed dyslexia, but at the heart there is still genre there, which is the fantasy adventure side. So we're tapping into the fantasy realm of Charlie, who's the lead in this story's mind, and where does that take him, and how does he overcome these obstacles by going into his imagination and using that as a form of superpower, really. And that's kind of where this next project is going. Then I'm also writing different stories, again, that's linked to the environment. I'm doing an environmental animation thriller, which is really exciting, called Haven. And another short as well, which is more of a war film. But these are all in the lead up this year to then hopefully have the feature film in ready to go by next year, to really press that forward.
That's it for this episode of Cine Bijou. Thanks for joining us as we pulled open the curtain once more, revealing the world of independent film and the creative mavericks who make it all happen. You can find this and every other episode on Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, and of course, Apple Podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a star review or drop us a comment? It's a small gesture, sure, but it means the world to us, and it helps fellow film fans find their way to us too. Make sure you also follow us on all the usual social media haunts: Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and Blue Sky. And for reviews, features and more, why not pay us a visit at our website www.cine-bijou.co.uk. And if you are spreading the word, please don't forget to use the hashtag #SupportIndieFilm, because every share helps keep great stories in the spotlight. Until next time, keep listening, keep discovering, and as ever, let's keep that indie flame burning.